because everyone can draw a cube, everyone can draw a sphere, right? Everyone can draw a pyramid. If you look at it from that particular vantage point, I think it would be a much more manageable project. I think the problem that I used to run into when I was trying to attempt to draw an environment is, first of all, where do I start? And I would usually start from like the top left and work all the way down to the bottom right. And usually it might look pretty good at the top left, but by the time I got to the bottom right, I wanted to throw the paper away. Because it was just totally not in proportion. It's kind of like, when you're approaching drawing like this, it's kind of like building a house. You're setting up like a blueprint, you're putting down a structure, and then you're adding the curtains and the special doorknobs and everything else like that at the very end. Those little details are the things that you should only concern yourself with at the very end. And that way, the details will fit. Because if we start with the details, it's kind of like starting with, figuring out the door trim when I haven't even built a house yet. It can be all kludged together.
You did an entire image in Photoshop?
Well, I penciled it underneath. Let me see if I can find the underdrawing for that. So let's see how that works. If I have it in the piece of these steps.
Yeah, people going, woo, outside.
So this is the underdrawing that I had.
Okay.
And I was looking at a photo. I found a photo on Flickr, and I was just basically using the photo as a reference.
Okay.
So this is the underdrawing, and you can see that when I started working on this, after I had established what the underdrawing was going to look like, I went in Photoshop and used the polygon lasso tool just to carve out basic shapes. So you can see some works in progress here.
Yeah.
And in some cases, you can actually see the underdrawing exposed through because I'm using multiply to be able to see underneath the layer that has paint. So that's what I eventually ended up with. And all this detail work only came in at the very, very end.
Okay. No, I mean, I just, the style looks very much like you did it in Illustrator.
Yeah,
which is why I was like...
It does have a very vector look.
Yeah.
And it also has that great Warner Brothers classic background feel to it.
Yeah, and a lot of the Warner designs are I kind of, if you deconstruct how Warner Brothers did their designs, they use the same thing too. A lot of their environments are very stylized. They're very much at an angle. You never see something straight on. Like, let me show you an example of... I do an entire class on environment, vehicle, and character design.
Nice.
So here's a sample Google image that I found, just an ordinary house. I like it just primarily because of the color choices. And instead of using Sketchbook Pro, I just started this out in Painter. I just drew a rough sketch, largely parallel lines with a couple of angled lines, just to get an idea of the basic structure of the house. Once I had that established, I brought this drawing into Photoshop, and I took the original sketch, added a little bit of distortion, and added some perspective and distortion, just to go ahead and take the edges and kind of curve them in a little bit more. Once I had that, and I was satisfied with it, then I would start the building process. And these are all solid shapes. This is all done through the polygon lasso tool. And I started building the house. So you can see it kind of in structures, and again, all polygon tool. And then I used the regular lasso tool to kind of draw the bushes and stuff, all the extra details. So that's the original sketch, and split it under without fence. And then I tried a couple of different color tests. That's the original, I tinted it. Then I also made it a little bit more desaturated to give it more of an atmospheric mood, like a creepy house. And this is another great way to overcome your fear of backgrounds. You can take something that you already are familiar with, take a house or a building or a street, and see if you can isolate it down into the basic shapes. The nice thing about stylization, I don't have to worry so much about being totally accurate to perspective. I think that's another thing that throws off a lot of artists when they're drawing in a very stylized way. It's like, oh no, I've got to measure everything out, it's got to be precise. Well, I'm not trying to reproduce a photo. I'm trying to get the essence of what that photo is and put it into a cartoony type scene. So for that, I don't need to worry about perspective so much. I just need to have a basic understanding of where the lines are going to be. And I think this tends to work really well. I mean, if you know perspective really well, that's good too. That can only help, especially if you're trying to draw this house from another angle. But it just depends on what you're trying to do. So things like houses, things like cars, they're all pretty much one and the same. Let me just show you some references that I found from other designers showing how they kind of work too. Guns. You can see how this gun is broken down into basic shapes. Before any details are arrived at, you've got very simple shapes. And in some ways, this is very much like the character design lecture that we talked about earlier this afternoon. You're having different variations of the same gun. A character designer doesn't just draw one character and turn it in and get the paycheck from their boss. They have to be willing to go back and forth and reiterate over the same character designs multiple times until the final look is arrived at. And that's where it gets to be frustrating sometimes. You know, other times you can zero in on a character very quick, but I've had both ranges where I've had work that's been very easy and work that's been very tedious because the person, the director, or the producer has some very serious ideas. They know exactly what they want, but I can't read their mind.
Oh, clients.
Yeah, I'm sure that's been run into. I'm sure everyone has kind of had that problem at one point or another. Look at this, even props. It's very difficult to get these things out of your head. That's why research is so important. If you're trying to draw an Old West saloon, see if you can find photographs of it. Don't try to go with memory. See what you can do. Then you can interpret it. I mean, obviously this is a piano, but there's some stylization to it to make it look a little bit more cartoony, right? I use digital techniques to arrive at that, but some people can actually see it in their head and draw it that way from the get-go. Whatever you feel comfortable with. There's no wrong answer. Is it cheating? No, I don't think it's cheating. I think it's just using the tools in a way that's going to make you work smarter. Here's some other environment designs. I didn't do these were other designers, but these are references that I show in class. And we talk a lot about color theory. That's one area that I haven't really explored so much with this class, but color theory is also really important at making things look as if they're close to you or further away. Usually, if you look at good background design, you'll see how color influences depth. Darker colors usually are in the very foreground, lighter colors recede into the background. But when I say darker colors, colors that are very high contrast are usually the foreground. Lighter, softer colors like blues and greens, those tend to kind of like drop into the background. And usually the palettes are very simplified. Let me show you some color tools that I use. There's a site called cooler.adobe.com. How many people here are familiar with that? Some of you are. This is a really fantastic site to explore color choices, and I'm getting a cooler flash. I don't know what that means. Well, they must have known that I was going to demo it today. Actually, so let me pull it up here. Within Photoshop, you actually have access to Cooler as well. You go to Window Extensions, Cooler. You can actually pick up the Cooler tabs from within Photoshop. Which is
Where was that
super
again?
nice. You go to Window Extensions, Cooler.
Okay.